Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 3rd of November 2025. I'm joined as ever by Mr. Andy Brockman, and I can only hope that he remembered the 5th of November.
It will be difficult not to. The October the 31st, Halloween, Samhain, whatever people want to call it.
Samhain.
So it's Samhain, sorry. So yeah,
Samhain.
Samhain. I do apologise. Samhain.
Yep.
And then obviously the Feast of All Saints, the Mexican Day of the Dead, fantastic popular cultural events. And then in the UK, of course, we have the 5th of November, the commemoration of one Guido Fawkes being discovered in the cellars of the Houses of Parliament in Westminster. With a large number of barrels of gunpowder. There's a joke that does the rounds every so often that he was the only person that ever went into Parliament with good intentions.
Yeah. Regardless of the fire festival of choice that has or is occurring close to you, our Watching Brief continues this week with a bit of an exploration of some planning issues. And I guess it goes from the parochial to the completely unbelievably egregious in terms of its scope. This episode.
Shall we start with the completely barking mad, unbelievably egregious?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, the planning is a bit of a theme, I guess, this month, and it's sort of coincidental. But it started off really with, I think, one heritage building conservation story which has gone viral across the whole planet, and that is the demolition of the east wing of the White House to be replaced by a ballroom which has seemed to have grown like Topsy. And it's now apparently said to seat up to 999 people. Presumably somebody left banging on the door outside to make it the full 1,000.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. What about the plus ones?
Yes,
you're going to be one person short by definition.
Absolutely. Taking it, if people remember the story of the coronation of King George IV, he was estranged from his wife, Caroline of Brunswick, and she supposedly beat on the barred doors of Westminster Abbey trying to get into the coronation. I'm just wondering, whenever Trump gets to inaugurate this ballroom before the end, if it's supposed to be finished before the end of his presidential term, whether we might have Melania bashing on the door to get in.
I doubt it. I think you should be quite happy in New York.
Yeah. But no, I mean the serious point behind it really has become self-satirizing. I notice now a lot of American commentators, to try and wind up the president and his supporters, are calling it the Epstein Memorial Ballroom. Trump has had to deny to the White House press corps that it's going to be named after him.
I am willing to put one shiny pound on the fact that it will be named after him. I have a pound coin just here. Just pick it up. The shiny pound. I'll keep it. And if it's not named after him, then that pound is going straight to a charity of your choice, Andy.
Look, no, I mean the serious point, I guess. New viewer start here. But basically, the east wing of the White House. I mean, the White House itself was built in the 1790s. The original White House was built in the 1790s as just a house for the president, and it was meant to be relatively low key. Compared to European palaces like Versailles, it was meant to show the no more kings of the American. That the president was the first citizen, and so it wasn't incredibly ostentatious. It's actually relatively small, and that's been a problem as government has become more complex. And wings were added The West Wing famously is where a lot of the administration works. People remember the TV series. The White House itself, which has the Oval Office and the Lincoln bathroom, the Lincoln bedroom, and and so on, is where guests stay. And then the East Wing was built in 1902. It has been changed. Well, it's been completely changed now, and that it no longer exists. But we'll come to that. But it was changed through the 20th century. In the Second World War, a hardened bunker was built in the basement underneath the East Wing for the use of President Roosevelt, and in fact, it was used as recently as the George Floyd riots in Trump's first term. The president sequestered himself down there. Dick Cheney, who died this week, was taken there during 9/11.
Right.
And so, and again, it's not clear what's happened to that and whether that's going to be rebuilt as well, or as part of this this current scheme. The President Trump's reason for doing this is, first of all, because he can. I'll come to that in a minute on the legal side, and because this is, ostensibly it's about planning, and planning for heritage buildings. Ostensibly the reason for it is it's a national showcase for major dinners and so on, for visiting world leaders. At the moment, they have to do it in a tent on the White House lawn, and that is not that's not fitting for the world's leading superpower. In fact, people have talked about visiting these White House parties in the quote a tent on the lawn. It's not a tent on the lawn. It's absolutely luxurious, and it's state of the art international entertainment, and it's glitzy and the food's good, and so there's a bit of there's maneuvering going on there. But having said that, any changes wouldn't damage the existing East Wing. They just go up to it. A few weeks ago, Americans woke up to basically backhoes and jackhammers taking down the entire East Wing in a few days. And so it started a controversy. The president argues, I say, that it's needed, and also that legally the White House is exempt from the regime, along with the Capitol. Actually, it's not just the White House, along with the Capitol, and I think it's one other building I can't remember off the top of my head, but that are exempt under the legislation that looks after heritage buildings, particularly heritage buildings in Washington. But that is controversial too. Certainly historically, even though presidents might have had the executive authority to make changes, they've traditionally gone through the traditional planning routes, which involve, and this will be very familiar to people in the UK and probably other places, that involves submitting detailed plans, it involves consultations, and so on. None of that appears to have happened here, although this has clearly been in the works for some time.
Well, obviously I'm stunned. I'm so surprised that this has happened under this administration. I'm so surprised that this is their attitude. No, it's a sign of the times, and it's interesting. Some of the commentary I've seen from friends online has been quite entertaining, from a sort of historical perspective. Some people saying, "Well, it's all well and good, we'll find out who it'll be named after, or whatever when it's completed." But the key question is, does it burn well?
We started off talking about Guy Fawkes, and absolutely,
yeah. So well, I've seen UK and US friends saying the same thing. So who knows? It may not even be a repeat of the British burning down the White House. It may in fact just be US citizens themselves at this rate.
Well, that's the other joke. That's the other joke, isn't it? That President Trump has done more damage to the White House since the British in 1812.
Yeah. I mean, good on him. Well done. No. It's not good, and I think it underscores one of the key hypocrisies of popular far right wing parties, and that is rooting themselves in an imagined past to project and have a sort of an attitude of the ends justify the means into an imagined future based on that past, which actually isn't rooted in anything to do with respect for the past or venerating or even just having a sort of putting the brakes on too much change in that sense. I can understand small c conservatism, not wanting to change too quickly, because it can be a bit of a knee-jerk for people when things change quickly. But this really shows that's not what these movements are about. And Donald Trump certainly is not about, the good old days, make America great again. That implies looking backwards to get a sense of the future. And here they're literally bulldozing through it, and also rather cynically, as you suggested, at a time when government is in shutdown, questions can't be asked officially, and those committees aren't meeting. So it's it's interesting to observe, and I guess it's one of those things where we can ask the question: could that or does that happen? For example, here. We have a very strong planning system, broadly speaking, in terms of the legacy of the polluter pays principles and so on and so forth, for now at least. But that said, though, individual places have been known to discount things like even UNESCO status in pursuit of local or current political desires. I'm thinking of Liverpool, for example, and the Albert Dock, saying, "Well, actually, we don't need that. We don't want or need UNESCO status. What we want is to build this building on the riverfront." And at the time, I was quite disappointed by that. But then again, at the same time, there is an argument to be made that places need to serve people and their lives as they are today. So it's interesting, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Liverpool. We'll come back to perhaps another UNESCO World Heritage Site, which we have a specific news item for. No spoilers, but it'll be coming very, very shortly in this particular watching brief. But Liverpool's very interesting. I mean, we've just in the last few weeks again, the new stadium for Everton Football Club has opened up down on the docks. They've left Goodison Park, famous their famous ground, and they have a new state-of-the-art ground, newest football ground in the country, down by the river. And by all accounts, it's very successful. But as you say, the developments in Liverpool have cost the city its World Heritage status. The Liverpool's politicians, as you say, seem not to be concerned about that.
Yeah. So what other news are we looking at then this week?
Okay, I teased or in fact you teased the potential for a UNESCO World Heritage Site related story. This one is some people have seen it as the end game for the A303 Stonehenge tunnel and upgrade, the Bowick Down project on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, aka the Stonehenge tunnel. It was paused by the incoming Labour government on financial grounds, but the planning consent was still in place. What's called the DCO, the Development Consent Order. which meant basically it could be picked up again at any time.
Hmm.
What has now happened is that the Transport Secretary has filed a case that it's currently out to consultation. The consultation closes in a couple of weeks, and then a decision will be made, and the government is minded to revoke the DCO, the Development Consent Order, which means that if the project were ever to be revived, the whole planning process would have to start over again.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, it would mean no Stonehenge tunnel for a decade or more.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, this has been highly controversial. Wiltshire County Council has been highly critical of the plan. They are on transport grounds saying that this was meant to relieve local traffic, and the government's going ahead and doing this without any consultation with the local authorities about, how they might mitigate the admitted issues with the A303 and running through local communities during busy times and so on. But the other people say, well, this project is now pointless because it was only useful if certain other projects further down the A303 towards the West Country had been carried out. They've been cancelled too. One source I've spoken to privately suggested that the government cancelled the project on the publicly acknowledged costs, which is something like 1.6 billion, I think it was. They think that what the government discovered when it went in to look at the books was that far from costing that amount, there was at least another billion on top of that, and maybe more.
Yeah.
So the project basically was running way over budget. Transport projects have a habit of running way over budget. And even in its original form, the National Audit Office said it was very poor value for money. So
to misquote our druid friend, King Arthur Pendragon, this never was, never has, and never will be about archaeology.
Correct.
In that sense, the number of people who I've seen, a small number of people, but nonetheless the same people I've seen on Blue Sky in particular, who have been very annoyed about this for archaeological reasons, and saying, we must make sure that the public understand that archaeologists didn't halt this, and this wasn't what archaeologists wanted, or rather what the archaeologists with whom they are friends wanted. Completely misses the point. The point is, at every stage of this process, it was always a civil engineering project. It was being decided upon on civil engineering basis, and archaeology was only ever going to be the byproduct, and not even a particularly important one in the minds of the public. It's fascinating how tongue-tied and how vitriolic actually the conversation around Stonehenge got in the archaeological community in the UK. Simply at times, one would point out, but it's not going ahead yet. Hang on. And you would be accused of not supporting archaeologists. You'd be accused of being anti-archaeology even. I know that, I'm not sure that presumably we can't say or name names, but we know that people were even being forcibly approached about this, if not harassed about this, by archaeologists as well. So it got ugly. It got ugly on both sides. People like
you're thinking of Tom Holland and Michael Wood, who were very active on the anti-tunnel.
That's it.
The argument.
For some reason, I always draw a blank with Tom Holland because I think of Spider-Man. People on that side of the campaign at times made headline-grabbing and sometimes unfortunate comparisons. For example, comparing archaeologists to being carrion crows following the dead around on a battlefield. That said, though, if all archaeologists could talk about was the fact that we get some good archaeology out of this, that is kind of pursuing the side effects of a simple civil engineering
Can
project.
Can I be really brutal on this, actually?
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things, yes, there were issues on the anti side. There was a lack of understanding of what developer funded archaeology is and does,
Yeah.
and the idea of carrion crows and so on. But it is absolutely undeniable that the British developer funded archaeological sector would have done very well out of this to reputedly, in terms of a published figure, the tune of 35 million quid in terms of overall investment in archaeological mitigation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And
against that couple of billion, that is peanuts.
it is peanuts. But also, as well, there were attendant opportunities for media coverage and commentary and so on and so forth. Again, I won't go into specifics on that. And it just became quite clear, as I said at the time, that we were at risk of seeing archaeologists being akin to a surgeon advocating unnecessary surgery on a patient who didn't require it, didn't need it in terms of their medical health, simply in order to showcase their own surgical abilities and the fact that they can do this surgery well. It spoke to a lack of confidence in one's own profession, and it actually at times was quite desperate because, again, folks, it was never fully greenlit. Yes, there was some preparatory works, but the project at no stage had the go-ahead. And yet this argument just erupted. And to be really clear, I'm not against it having happened. You know, in that sense, if it was going to happen, of course the archaeology should happen, and of course we get some potentially amazing archaeology out of it. Obviously, we don't know what's there by definition, but we never got to that point. And the fact that especially the open letter that was anonymously signed, the public open letter, was pushed so hard by so many people in Archaeology UK, is disappointing, because I think it shows a certain amount of legal illiteracy at best, I suppose. And at worst, it showed a complete abandonment of actual best practice. And that is, as far as I'm concerned, preservation in situ.
Preservation in situ and accepting international standards that you've signed up to, like the UNESCO World Heritage status.
Yeah.
Which was seen by some of the archaeologists on the pro tunnel side as a sort of an impediment to their work. And I need to put my cards on the table as well, like you. If the project had gone ahead, I have absolutely no doubt the archaeology done would have been the best that was possible under the circumstances.
Well, of course it would. That's my point.
But was
that ever in doubt? Like,
the archaeologists opposing the campaign to not to build the tunnel.
I suggested it wasn't necessarily fully funded in the way it might be.
That's it.
Right, okay.
But there were accusations that the campaign was anti-archaeology. It wasn't. There were very senior archaeologists involved in the campaign. What was picked up were very unfortunate, and again, I think the people involved in for example, the Stonehenge Alliance, they admit that, for example, somebody liking I think it was a post on Twitter by a member of the sort of blood and soil far right attacking the tunnel campaign as attacking our sacred landscape, was at the very least unfortunate. But then it's the kind of thing that happens. We see politicians do it all the time, and we were dealing there with amateur people who cared about the environment.
But also supposedly archaeologists are a bunch of people who care about stakeholders, so-called, care about people who have opinions about the places where they work. And the open letter actively dismissed those potential stakeholders.
Absolutely.
So, again, I'm not against the project. I'm not against the fact that archaeology would have been done to a high standard, and it could have been fascinating. But basic legal literacy, basic best practice standards, I think, were being abandoned, and people were getting
Yeah.
way ahead of themselves on this. Definitely.
It's interesting you pick up the point about legal literacy, because I think there's another thing. I don't want to make a lot of it this watching brief, because first of all, it's been litigated literally for a couple of years now, and also there is now a legal decision in the case of the alleged libel in the case of the film The Lost King. But in that case, you've had a court case. In fact, there's two court cases we can bring here as well, because I think we should perhaps segue into talking about the Lost King by talking also about the Stonehenge case of the three Just Stop Oil activists who a week ago were acquitted in the Salisbury Crown Court of causing criminal damage over the orange powder that was blown across the some of the stones at Stonehenge using adaptive fire extinguishers in 2024. It was a protest that went viral. They were made no bones about the fact they were doing it. They sat down and waited to be arrested while the video went viral. And the court case, though, hinged on nothing to do. The defence hinged on nothing to do with the heritage aspect of the site, but to do with the human rights and freedom of speech of the protesters to protest proportionately about a government policy. And what appears to have happened there is that the defence succeeded. The three defendants were acquitted of causing criminal damage and distress and various other things that the prosecution alleged. And what appears to have happened there is that, and again, as an archaeologist, I find this quite difficult. Same as the Colston case, I think there's a lot of crossovers between the Colston case in Bristol, where the defendants who were tried for pulling down the Colston statue and dunking it in Bristol Harbour were also acquitted in a jury trial, using similar defences. But that, in the case of Stonehenge in particular, you have this iconic monument, World Heritage Site. They blew orange powder across it. They got given very stiff charges that went to a Crown Court rather than just dealing with in the Magistrates' Court. And it looks as though the authorities set out to make an example of them. Just Stop Oil have been the target of a lot of initiatives from the Home Office, to the extent that, for example, the charges that were brought for Just Stop Oil activists who sat on gantries over the M25, brought the M25 to a halt, or sat on the Dartford Bridge and brought that to a halt, they got prison sentences of several years. And I think that's what the prosecuting authorities were looking for in this case too. They wanted to shut down that kind of protest by making an example of the defendants, pour encourager les autres. But I think what came out in the trial and all the accounts I've read of it were that it hinged, yes, on the human rights issue, but also proportionality. It came out in the trial that the cleanup of the stones at Stonehenge cost £620. That will buy you one of those lawyers probably for an hour or so.
Yeah, or maybe two guidebooks.
Possibly. It is English Heritage's one of English Heritage's most lucrative properties. So yeah, probably getting close. Yeah. But no, in all seriousness,
the parking, actually, to be fair, yeah,
that's true. Yes, I went for the car park and saw the monument. But in all seriousness, it looks like in attempting to make a wider political point about protest, the prosecuting authorities, which is basically the Home Office, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the police, overplayed their hand. It will be very interesting to see if it now comes, some of the conversations now come out, for example, that the CPS may have been under particular pressure to bring certain charges.
Well, of course they were. We've seen people who've been very peacefully protesting get massive sentences in recent years for Just Stop Oil. And yet, ironically enough, when you have landowners protesting taxation on their land, driving vehicles that are taking advantage of fuel subsidies in the form of farming vehicles with red diesel in them through the streets,
and driving those vehicles very slowly through central London, where there are strict pollution controls, and you get you pay a very large congestion charge if you drive a non-compliant vehicle. They don't get fined. No,
they don't get taken to prison. They don't get anything. And so there's definitely been a bias, and in that sense it is motivated by something. Certainly there's this difference in treatment. And it's interesting to see, though, that when put in front of the public, in this instance, the public went, nope. There's a legitimate concern here, and they're protesting. And I suppose, I think I just said to you the other day on the phone, where else are you going to do it? If they turned up at some random stone in Farmer Giles' field, 50 miles away, that, is listed and has a little plaque and stuff, and protested there, no one's going to know. No one's going to notice. The point of a protest is to get attention, and Stonehenge is one of those places. It's I respect the fact that they didn't use paint or something which was corrosive, for example.
It was there were 3 ingredients that came out in court. I think it was cornflour dye, and I can't remember what the third was. But basically, they calculated that it was. It would not cause damage, and it was completely. It was instantly, easily reversible. And in fact, I think that the fact that Historic England spent, English Heritage spent, 620 quid to clean it up, suggests that maybe they were right. There were suggestions. Oh, if it had rained, it might have turned into a paste and damaged the lichen and so on. But it was washed off.
One of my favorite headlines was that it came out in court that the protesters drove in a non-electric vehicle to the site, and it's just like, oh, fuck off, come on.
Which belonged, I think, if I remember rightly, belonged to one of the defendant's grandmothers.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this idea of oh, I see, you're protesting something about society, but you are a member of society, eh? Ooh, got ya. Yeah. And it's just like, no. I mean, that's the point. They're protesting the fact that it's not easy to live and not cause damage via vehicles like that in this country.
Can I pick up that member of society thing? So I think that's the point in discussing this I'd like to leave our viewer with. And I'm in the process of I'm about to launch a new Substack, folks.
Oh, brilliant!
Later, but the first article's about this and the other case that we're about to talk about, the Lost King. The point I'm going to be making in that is that, as an archaeologist, I am uncomfortable with the idea that people can use altering part of the historic environment as the focus for a protest, because it could go horribly wrong. Some people would argue it did go horribly wrong in the Colston case. The statue was ripped from its pedestal. It was daubed in paint and slogans, dunked in the harbour. But I think I take the view that archaeology is too important. Two things. First of all, archaeology is possibly, on some occasions, like medical ethics and things like that, they should sometimes be seen as too important just for archaeologists to make the decisions over. And I think if a community...
Hang on. Are you not supporting archaeological expertise there, Andy? Sounds to me like you don't have no faith in your colleagues. That's not very good.
I have absolute faith in my colleagues when they act in good faith.
Yeah.
I'm an archaeologist. I have qualifications in archaeology. I've done archaeology. I now write about archaeology and research it all the time. It's something I'm absolutely dedicated to. But the point I would make is that archaeology exists in a wider societal context. And some things, like the future of the planet, I would argue, and being fair and just and acknowledging past faults and egregious behaviour towards other members of that society, as was the case in the Colston argument. Those things might lead to situations where the archaeological considerations come second. And more broadly, I'm happier living in a community, in a society, in a country where people who feel very strongly about a really important issue, like the future of the planet, can make a non-violent, non-damaging protest and not face years in prison for it.
Ultimately, it's a matter of resolution. The only reason that people might get upset about this is because it was visible and they could see it. The number of things that have happened at Stonehenge during the course of its thousands of years of existence that we may not approve of as archaeologists is incalculable. And so in that sense, the stones will, the kids will be all right, as they say. The stones will be all right. But also, there's something else to bear in mind. The arguments can be made in terms of, again, resolution, in terms of time. In 100 years' time, that act on that site will be seen as part of the history of the site. We can't imagine that history is somehow separate from the present day. The present is always becoming history, and in that sense, it's not quarantined from us. It's part of why people go to Stonehenge. It's part of why Stonehenge is such a viable protest target and location, and in that sense, the two are intertwined. You can't separate the two, and so it's interesting to see, just intellectually as archaeologists, the irony that sometimes comes to play and comes to bear on moments like this. So what do you have to say then about the Lost King? Obviously, Steve Coogan, it was announced a few days ago, is paying substantial damages, I think was the quote, to the damaged party, based on his film about Richard III, Philippa Langley's account of the events surrounding the discovery of his remains in a car park in Leicester.
And just to remind our viewer, the Lost King was a film based on Philippa Langley's book and other research by Steve Coogan, who wrote the screenplay along with his regular co-writer Jeff Pope. It was a film that was made. It was distributed by Pathé, who were also part of the case, but there was also involvement from the BBC. Cut to the chase. Richard Taylor, who was the then senior administrator at the University of Leicester, alleged that his portrayal was defamatory. He's portrayed in his real name in the film, as are pretty much all the other leading characters. That they're given their real names, and it would be difficult not to do a film about the Richard III excavation without it, because everybody would know who was portrayed. When the leading archaeologist is portrayed, that is, is it Rich Buckley, isn't it? That osteologist is Joe Appleby. So they were given their real names. At the same time, there's the usual that some events may have been da-di-da-di-da-di-da. What Richard Taylor said was that his portrayal was so egregious that he'd been defamed, and he took Baby Cow, the production company, Steve Coogan as the as a leading executive with Baby Cow, and also the co-writer of the film, and Pathé, the distributor, to court. He alleged various things, not all of which were upheld by the court. But basically, cut to the chase. Yes, he received substantial damages. There'll also have been costs. So they're probably looking at, the figures haven't been released, but for a case like that, you're probably looking at north of £1 million altogether. And that was being greeted by a number of people in archaeology world as a vindication for the criticism of the movie, that it belittled and sidelined the professionalism of the Leicester archaeologists who'd actually undertaken the excavation, using a substantial amount of money from Philip O. Langley, who had originated the project, and the Richard III Society, amongst others. So it's a complicated project. In a sense, it's sort of developer funded, or it's client funded in large part. Then Leicester came in on it because of the potential tourism issues and things like that. And then the university jumped in with a lot of very expensive post-ex, because, again, I think they probably realised that they had something that was going to do their profile no harm at all as an academic organisation. A very respected academic organisation, one that does very high quality archaeology. Right? So, and the argument was that, as I said, the archaeologists who'd undertaken the excavation were being sidelined, that a film that was supposed to be about a woman being again, victimized, her role being downplayed by this organisation of men, led by men, were a film like that with that kind of thesis shouldn't have reduced the role of, for example, Joe Appleby in exhuming the skeleton, and particularly the role of Dr. Terry King in proving that it was Richard III through DNA work. Now, as I think we discussed before, and we can link to our earlier discussion about The Lost King because we reviewed it in Unstratified Entertainment. No film, and not even a drama documentary, can cover absolutely every aspect of an event. That's well known. Screenwriters make choices.
But I get where you're going, and we've talked about. I think we touched on this in our review, which obviously we'll be linking below.
Yeah.
But isn't this kind of not the point, in so much as it wasn't the court case about a member of the administrative staff at the university feeling that they were hard done by,
and the court finding that they were?
Yes. This has nothing to do with the archaeology. Again, this is like Stonehenge in that sense.
No, absolutely. That's the point I was going to make. The court case was not about the archaeology. The court case was about the way Richard Taylor's character was portrayed.
Yeah.
That's why he got substantial damages.
Yeah, and yet we've seen some people calling it an anti-science myth, and being, specifically a film that was setting out to. In a Trumpian or anti-vax way, that's a direct quote, portray the story as being somehow, about the truth-finding citizen versus the nasty archaeologists and professionals. That's not what the film was about. It's not what the court case was about. I have problems with the film. I've talked about this elsewhere. I've talked about it in our review.
I do too.
I definitely have problems with the film. But I suppose if your problems are that big, then do what Richard did and take them to court, I guess, if you really want to. Or, God forbid, show up for conversations and pay attention to matters that really have an effect on your profession. For example, earlier this year, the story of the CEO hired by CIFA, who potentially never quit his previous role and who left under mysterious circumstances, and recruitment for whom tens of thousands of pounds above and beyond the normal were spent from SIFA's budget, which largely is consisting of membership money. I know that's not as sexy a story as Richard III and a movie, but it's more directly important and relevant to your careers, archaeologists watching this, than whether or not Steve Coogan upset someone.
I've got this great idea for a sort of Inspector Morse type show.
Yeah,
where this professional body of archaeologists and antiquaries has a CEO, and then suddenly they disappear and nobody knows what's happened. And the detective, the troubled private life and a drink problem, comes in with his sidekick and solves the issue.
Yeah,
I think I might pitch that.
Yeah, like a bit. Do you have the drink problem, or do I? I did.
was it the old joke? I drink, I fall down, no problem.
Yeah. Or is it I drink and I know things?
Yeah. Look, no. I mean, just to finish on the Lost King. I think we need to finish on the Lost King because much time and angst has been spent on it. I think, good luck to Richard Taylor. He felt he'd been wronged. He and his lawyers convinced the court he'd been wronged. He got the settlement in his favour. He gets substantial damages. University of Leicester have been doing a victory lap on this. If you go to their website, I mean, there's extensive coverage of this and comments and so on. Steve Coogan, in his own right, has come out and done some interviews and so on. And what Coogan says, and it's absolutely true, uncomfortable though it might be for the archaeologists looking at this, who thinking that the archaeology has been vindicated and whatever. Basically, the only difference anyone watching the film now, as opposed to somebody watching it before the settlement, will see, there's been no cuts, no edits, no reshoots. There is a card in the opening credits that says Richard Taylor is fictionalized in the film, and the real Richard Taylor acted with integrity throughout. Everything else is as it was. So all the criticisms that and the suggestions that it saved the archaeological view of that project and so on, I think that's it's a misunderstanding of what the court actually did.
Yeah. It's also a misunderstanding of what an awful lot of members of the public think and feel about this. There's lots of commentary online where people say, "Thank goodness Philippa finally got her dues." Now, that's a narrative that we cannot control. I think it's false, in so much as Philippa Langley was always connected to Richard III. She appeared prominently in the press throughout, before, during, and after his funeral. She continues to be connected with Richard III. If you think about Richard III, you think of Philippa Langley.
Doing feature documentary with Rob Rinder about the princes in the tower for Channel 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Which again we reviewed.
Yeah, no, we did. Yeah, we'll link to that as well below. And that's fine. She's a member of the Richard III Society. She did do research, and that research was of quality, and led to an important discovery, or contributed to that discovery at the very least. It's interesting just to point out that an awful lot of people thought that Richard was buried in that car park. Anecdotally, a friend of mine whose mum is from Leicester took him as a child to the car park and said, "Richard III is buried here." So, but that's beside the point. Philippa has always been associated with this discovery. Yes, there was drama. Yes, there were at times some rumblings within the archaeological community. I think archaeologists who deny that to be the case are misremembering. I remember it myself. Yes. I know you do as well.
I do too. I do too. Yes.
Yeah. But ultimately, as you say, it doesn't alter the fact that a lot of people kind of like to buy into this underdog story. And the more archaeologists are seen as being bitter about whether or not a semi-fictionalized Hollywood portrayal of a discovery is accurate professionally or not, the less likely you are to
Have
win
they
over
ever watched the Indiana Jones movies?
Well, exactly, yes. But the less likely you are to win over those people who do
Yeah.
want to buy into the underdog story and do potentially consider you to be a snob, frankly, archaeologists. And so yeah, it's interesting. And as I say, we've done lots of reporting. I actually in the last 18 months, certainly this year, that I think deserves much more attention, that is not getting that attention, because we keep on being riled up by this sort of thing, which ultimately has no real world actual bearing on archaeological practice.
Yeah. No, I mean, just on the Philippa Langley thing, she was, she's an example of something, and I think maybe this is part of where the friction comes from. She's an example of a very long tradition in archaeology and antiquarianism, which is the knowledgeable amateur, somebody who's not trained in a particular field, but self-trains, and sometimes gets it wrong, and sometimes gets the etiquette wrong. And sometimes, and I mean, you mentioned your friend from Leicester was shown the car park, and it was well known that the church had been on that site, that Richard was supposedly buried there after Bosworth. The argument, and broadly speaking, where it was and where he was likely to have been buried if he had been buried there, the debate was for a long time. Was his tomb defiled? Was it defiled at the time of the Reformation? Did his bones end up in the River Soar? Clearly, we now know they didn't. But that had been a debate for several hundred years, and it was just brought to a head by Philippa Langley and the Richard III Society putting up that money to the University of Leicester's archaeology unit to do that work, and the rest has flowed from that.
Yeah, and that is absolutely to their credit.
Yes,
it's also
both sides credit.
Yeah, it's also as well. Finally, just important to note, I am also personally uncomfortable with some of the ways in which she describes Richard's remains and some of the ways in which she relates to Richard's remains. At times, it borders on what looks like obsession, if not something approaching romance. Actually, she's so invested in this, and I don't mean that tongue in cheek. I mean genuinely, she seems so passionate about this. I can see why that makes archaeologists uncomfortable, because we are, especially when you don't know whose skeleton it is yet. We are. Well, there was
the case that we pointed to. Yeah, I mean the case we pointed to when we reviewed the Channel 4 documentary about this, where the remains were placed in a casket with the Royal Standard over. And the archaeologists being uncomfortable about that.
It was Joe Appleby. Joe didn't want to do it. Yeah, she's on camera saying, "I'm not sure I want to do that." Yeah,
absolutely. Langley's point of view on that was we only get to do this once. I think we think, and if it is him, we can never do it again.
And yet, at the time, she was still of the opinion that Richard didn't really have a spinal problem. And this skeleton clearly had a curved spine. So, again, were I there, I might have said, I know. Is this him? Are you sure it's him? Do you want this to be him? Because this skeleton has a curved spine, Philippa. But yes, again, yes, the argument is, as you say, you only get to do it once. But even so, that's not archaeological practice. It's also not actually historians' practice either. No. Historians don't do that. But regardless, passion is crucial, and passion got them there. And I don't blame people though for being uncomfortable with that passion, because that passion was not. If it had gone the other way, if they'd done the DNA work and it was just a monk or a bishop or someone, someone else buried it in pride of place in that chapel
in the church,
then that would have been, why the heck were you putting a flag over that guy's box? That would have been, it would have been akin to, and I've seen people say this, it was like cosplaying with a skeleton, and that's so not what archaeology is about. We try our best to be respectful of human remains, and in that sense, both parties were attempting to be respectful.
Yes, in their own terms. It's just that on occasions they They weren't able to reach an agreement.
No. Well,
or at least one party or other was left uncomfortable with the decision that the other side had made.
Yeah, because it was the standard was draped over it, and it was put into the van with the flag on it. So, yeah. Anyway, interesting case. Hopefully, as I say, archaeologists at home, we can all move on and get on with tackling some of the root issues in our sector, because there's excellent stories out there to be understood. There's wonderful questions to be asked, and we need to start doing that.
We do. Shall I just to finish? Shall I be really boring and loop back to developments? I mean, is this something else I want to flag up to our viewer? Yeah. No. This is absolutely not controversial. It's only about the most vulnerable historical sites in England.
Okay.
We started off talking about a very high-profile case of redevelopment and a heritage building that has been thrown aside. Well, not thrown aside, jackhammered aside in the cause of renewal, growth, the ego of the president. No, sorry. In the United States. In England, we still have a legal and legally binding development system where the checks and balances still more or less operate. Although there's an element I will come to in a minute. But this week, we'll link to the page below, the government's regulator and heritage advisor, Historic England, published the annual Heritage at Risk Register. Okay. Basically, what it is, it's a snapshot of what are regarded as the most vulnerable historical buildings and sites in England, in English heritage, in Historic England's remit, as the regulator. It lists this year 4,891 sites of different kinds. I'll do a couple of the figures in a minute. The good news is that 129 sites that were on the list last year have been removed because solutions have been found to the things that were putting them in danger. But the flip side of that is 138 have been added. Of which the most that have been added are buildings and other structures, and also churches, and other places of worship. The good news on the archaeology side is that 40 sites that were deemed at risk have been removed, and only 10 have been added.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if it came too late for this year's list, or it was put up for listing and wasn't. But no additional battlefields have been added. No. Okay. Are deemed at risk or have been added. Same with historic wrecks. And in terms of urban issues, conservation areas are also taken into account. There are 469 which were deemed at risk, which is perhaps a bit concerning. But 9 have been removed and only 3 have been added. Okay. So what it doesn't make clear is how many sites were removed for not positive reasons, i.e. they were destroyed or deemed no longer viable as heritage sites. I need to dig through the figures to have a look at that, but they don't put, for some reason, I can't imagine what it is, they don't put that front and center. No. Yeah. I mean, this is framed by Historic England wanting to promote responsible ownership of heritage assets, responsible custodianship by people like local authorities, local planning authorities. They quote that they gave granting aid of 7.4 million to buildings on the Heritage at Risk Register last year. 123 sites altogether. But then if you think about 123 sites out of 4,891, it's not a lot. No. So there's a big challenge here for everybody involved in our environment, basically. And I think it just throws up that even when there are protections in place, there are vulnerabilities. And in fact, I'll just pull up the there was a debate in Parliament the other day when the Heritage Minister was speaking to MPs, and there's a couple of interesting things have come up. You'll be familiar with the Transporter Bridge in Middlesbrough.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big debate going on about how to preserve and conserve that. The local MP Andy MacDonald wrote a piece in Byline Times this week saying basically, there is a plan to repair it, put it back into operation, put it back in, give it a future sustainable life. Mayor Huchin, who we talked about before in terms of the Dorman Long Tower, has suggested demolishing it and building a replica. I'm making no comment about that.
Wow.
But also in your neck of the woods in the northeast, another local MP, Liz Twist, asked the culture minister about the threat to listed buildings, many of which are included in that heritage at risk register, and it was in the context of a fire at a place called Shotley Park in Durham, County Durham, and the minister said in Parliament, quote, "There's no specific duty on owners to keep a building in a good state of repair." And then he added, "Local authorities have the power to take action where a listed building may be at risk. Yeah, but they've also got to have the will. They've also got to have the money to commit to a legal process where potentially a developer or an owner says, I don't want to pay for that. Why should I pay for that? You can't make me pay for that." So we're dealing with a very contentious, difficult area. We've talked about buildings going afire many times on the watching brief. So I think I just point to the Heritage at Risk Register. There's a very good interactive map where you can look at wherever you are in England. You can look at the what heritage is at risk in your area. Maybe something that you can engage with in your area and with your local planning authority and the local representatives of Historic England and so on. Just to finish on today's watching brief, there's no guarantee that even when something is going to be restored, it ends up with a positive outcome. Earlier on this week, it made the news that the Torre dei Conti in Rome, which is a medieval tower which was being renovated, partially collapsed, injuring a number of workers. And there's a lot of viral video about that. We're dealing with a difficult, complicated, expensive area, but one where people, I think, really need to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, that has been this week's watching brief. It's been quite a lot. But I think quite a lot has happened since the last episode, so fair dues. One thing to look out for, though, next week is potentially another in the long list of weird archaeology comms, I guess. The next episode, perhaps even a bulletin, an emergency bulletin, or just for the shits and giggles bulletin coming next week, maybe. Because lessons continue to be required and they continue to be learned in the realm of archaeology public communications. I won't go any further with that, but Andy is following it up, aren't you?
I am indeed. Can I make one last very quick point as well? It's we're talking about archaeology media and the media that deals with history. I just want to shout out to the late Peter Watkins, the director of The War Game, but also one of the best historical documentaries I think the BBC's ever produced, called Culloden. It's made in 1964. It's available on YouTube. He pioneered a verite style of historical documentary on very small budgets, and Culloden is one of the most powerful historical documentaries you could ever see. I think if you haven't seen it, go over to YouTube and we'll put the link in. But in terms of historical storytelling, Peter Watkins was a phenomenal talent. So a quick shout out to him. And otherwise, please like, share, and subscribe to the watching brief, and we'll see you next time.
Will do. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.